Hello and welcome. You are watching Business Plus here on News 9 Live. I am Krishnakumar and we begin straight away with the stock markets. India's benchmark indices, both the Sensex and the Nifty, surged to record highs today, driven by gains, especially in the Adani Group stocks and other heavyweight financial stocks as well. Sensex has scaled the 64,000 mark, and the index, in fact, hit 64,050 in the intraday session, while the Nifty also crossed the milestone 19,000 mark and hit a fresh high of 19,011. Benchmark indices were supported by gains in metal stocks, banking stocks, financials, consumer products, auto, pharma, and energy stocks as well, because the Nifty Pharma was the top gainer among the sectoral indices as far as the Nifty is concerned. Now, apart from that, the individual stocks, the Adani twins leading the charge over there. Adani Enterprises was the top gainer in the Nifty pack, rising by over 4%, followed by Adani Ports, which was up over 3.5%. On the other hand, HDFC Life Insurance, which fell about 3.5%, was the biggest laggard among Nifty stocks. Hero MotoCorp, Wipro and Tech Mahindra were some of the other stocks that destroyed investors' wealth in today's session. And with that, we'll wrap up our market coverage and move on to the big story that we are wondering as far as the business and economy of our lives and livelihoods is concerned. Is there a season of layoffs that are doing the rounds at this stage? Because you're talking about Google laying off again at Waze mapping services after laying off 12,000 people over there, and then UBS. Are we again in the middle of a season of layoffs? We have a very special bunch of guests. We have Rituparna Chakraborty, co-founder TeamLease, joining us. We have Prabir Jha, former CHRO, RIL, and founder and CEO, joining us. Pragati Sharma, founder and CEO, I4 HR Consulting, joining us. So the question here is, what is going to happen with our jobs going forward? Are we in the middle of another season of layoffs? Because across the board, we are seeing companies skeptical about hiring people at this stage. Right, we have Prabir Jha, former CHRO, RIL, founder and CEO, joining us. Prabir Jha, talking to. Thank you so much for taking time out to be with us over here. Tell us, in terms of the signals again are worrying, even as we're seeing green shoots in the Indian economy.
So, Krishna, I think it's a very good question, but we must see India as a partner, as part of global business, and India as a standalone entity. As the stock market results you just shared, says that the India story is very strong, and therefore pure India play, domestic consumption-led industries and sectors. I think the story is intact, and I do not personally think too much of an upsurge in those markets. But those which are globally linked or very dependent on global markets, we continue to see a lot of frostiness in business in Europe and the US particularly. And since you talked about technology and some of the financial services stocks, there is some trepidation as to which way it will go. So for me, it depends on the sector. It depends on whether the stories and intersect with the global markets or it's actually a pure India play. But having said that, I think it's important to also mention that I do see a lot of structural correction in terms of manpower planning and in the way employment practices would possibly play out, not only in this season, but directionally over the next some years.
I also want to understand, is it a function of a cycle? Is it a phase, or are you looking at a situation where it's not meant to be read too much into?
So some of this is definitely a redistribution of skill sets, because in some segments, particularly technology, there is a reset of what skills you need. And I think there's a fair bit of disruption happening there. So there is a realignment that I see happening very clearly. Second is, at the end of the day, I personally see that in other sectors also, while at one level, the big are getting bigger, the story of the startup, in this current season has been a bit of a dampener. The funding winter is still continuing, and therefore a lot of excitement, a lot of potential job losses are coming from those spaces as well. And they may be smaller entities, but together, I think they were consuming both, a huge number of people, and more importantly, the sentiment. There was a lot of euphoria about that. So I think it's a bit of, a phase. I personally believe that India will finally get back to a very, very healthy startup story, because there are lots of gazelles and cheetahs waiting to be unicorns. But the bigger companies are actually, trying to remorph themselves, because there has been, let's admit it, hiring which has been more euphoric than realistic in the past few quarters.
We also have Rituparna Chakraborty from TeamLease, co-founder, joining us. Rituparna, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. We're wondering whether are we in the middle of another season of layoffs?
Thanks for having me on the show. I think rather than starting my comments with kind of responding to an extremely pessimistic perspective of what's going on, but if I may share with you all that recently S&P retained India's growth trajectory at 6%. Today's in the front page of today's Economic Times, we saw Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon's interview, where he says that our India is the biggest opportunity story, and that's where all the opportunities lie. And none of that is a lie. It essentially means that whatever is currently the weather of the moment is not something which is going to be temporary in nature, and it's probably not how we should look at how the future is going to be. What has happened, and like Mr. Jha clearly elucidated, that in the recent times and also after the pandemic, there has been a lot of knee-jerk reactions in the employment market. I mean, some of it probably is for lack of better judgment. Some of it is because people were extremely optimistic and after being shut down completely for 3 years. So we saw a lot of euphoric hirings. We saw a lot of optimism. Some of it where, of course, when you reflect back, you think of them as irrational. And I think finally the show must go on. You need to run a sustainable business. You need to ensure that you're running the business in a manner that is here for a longer duration of time. And there is a lot of dynamism in the environment. I mean, today, different external factors impact organizations much quicker than it has ever before. And hence, there has to be a recalibration in the choices that organizations make, the way they hire people, the skill sets they hire for, and so on and so forth. So, yes, what's happening, and I don't think it would be right to also say that it's happening across all organizations. I think it's happening, yes, in a set of organizations which made certain choices over the last 3-4 years, and they're trying to kind of recalibrate and optimize probably. But I do believe that side by side, there is a story of sustenance. There is some sustained hiring and positive movements which are happening. So I don't think that we should expect that this is how the world would be or the situation would be in India. It's sad, it is unfortunate, but it also comes with its own set of learnings which will help organizations plan their resources prudently in the future. There is also one thing which I'd like to call out. There has been a huge recalibration which is happening in terms of the skill sets that are in demand. And anyone who's right now part of the formal job market should not actually ever believe that whatever the skill sets of the past, which has entitled me to where I am today, is what's going to help us in the future. Because the demands and the needs are changing. Just to summarize, whatever I've been saying is that layoffs is just a temporary phase. It's essentially course correction for some choices that were made post-pandemic or in the euphoria of the moment, like Mr. Jha has clearly elucidated. However, these are important learnings. And I don't think it is something that one can generically say has been happening across all organizations. There's some organizations have been extremely resilient. They've been running their businesses in a sustainable manner. And India is a growth story. I mean, yes, there are some corrections, there are some lessons in it for all of us, but I don't think we should believe that it is there's a doomsday story out there. The hirings will happen, but yes, they'll be well calibrated. They'll be focused around certain emerging skill sets. And if we can measure, to imagine that every time there will be a bumper announcement, I don't think we should believe that that's the world we'll ever live in again.
Right. If I were to ask it in a different way, there seems to be, when it comes to jobs, there are two issues. One is the fact that one of the major job generator in the country, in India specifically speaking, which is the startups, are in a major flux, and that's because different categories of startups, in fact, the edtech startups, which were a major employment generator, especially during the pandemic, is in a complete state of flux. And then there are other startups which are facing their own set of issues. And then if you don't want to do a startup, you want to just go join an MNC, looks like things are not any great either over there, isn't it, Mr. Jha?
I still don't think that, things are as bleak as, how these seasonal comments and news of layoffs, appear. I mean, from my own experience of advising companies and even of some senior level searches, I can tell you the mood is reasonably strong and positive. I think, it's also important for us to call out that there are certain sectors and spaces which is seeing more volatility. It is not across the board. And unfortunately, what gets talked about or reported also has a sectoral nuance. So I would advise that we take a lot of this news with a pinch of salt. Having said that, I think, as Rituparna also said, that organizations, industries, sectors are all getting wiser. I think people are hiring smarter. People are hiring with a little bit more of trepidation. And I personally believe that slowly but surely the shift from just full-time regular employment is moving increasingly to contractual or gig-based hiring. It still is not being talked about much, but I see some of that as a clear sectoral shift. And I personally believe that a lot of these layoff issues happen when you get into a lifelong employment model, and then there's a blip and you need to, for business reasons or otherwise, need to course correct immediately. I think whether it is the startup world or mature organizations, they have made their share of mistakes. Let me tell you. I mean, I seeing things from the distance now, I can tell you, I think they have not thought through, but they've learned their lessons. So I continue to be very bullish. And please remember that at the end of the day, the kind of investments that are being promised to be made in India is going to generate directionally, directly, and also indirectly, employment, which is far higher than what we've seen before. But we've got to allow the cookie to crumble rather than, declare it's doomsday. It's not doomsday for sure.
Right. We also have Pragati Sharma, founder and CEO of I4 Consulting, now joining us on this broadcast. Pragati Sharma, thank you so much for being with us. Talk to us. Are we reading too much into the signs that we are seeing from all these big thousands of numbers in which layoffs are taking place? Are we reading too much, or are we not?
No, I think we should understand probably three major phenomena. I think one, we all agreed that during the COVID phase, there was probably overestimation on the kind of talent and the kind of business growth that will happen. So that correction had to happen. And I think this is the time that that correction is happening, right? Secondly, let's understand that this is such an evolving digital transformation era that we are going through. And if talent doesn't upskill itself, it will have to wean itself out. I think that's a major trend that we are seeing across edtech, fintech, martech, across all new age companies, where focus is shifting to new areas. And if even software engineers, if they're not able to upskill themselves, then that talent index really is losing itself, leading to obviously what we know as layoffs. I think third is, we all know funding winter is here. So startups that were hiring without focus on profitability, focusing on business growth, are now really looking at survival. So when you're looking for survival, obviously layoffs will happen. I think this whole shift in focus overall is extremely positive. The hiring space in a lot of industries is extremely, extremely positive, including fintech, AI, ML. I mean, it is booming the way we've never seen it. Analytics, data science, these are growth areas. And if talent is not going to be able to, evolve and learn, then obviously we will see layoffs. Last but not the least, let's remember this is performance appraisal time, right? And whenever it is performance appraisal time across companies, we do see some bit of, some bit of weaning off. So that's very natural. We should still remain extremely bullish on the economic environment.
All right, all right. In that sense, if I want to take this back to Mr. Jha, a lot of it is got to do with the reskilling as well. In that sense, is it that that gap or the delta of of the workforce realizing that for secure, stable, guaranteed employment, reskilling and upskilling is going to be the name of the game going forward?
It will be. Absolutely, you're right, Krishna. It will be. And I think it's not something that you wake up to once, the writing is on the wall. You almost imagine what the writing on the wall is going to be. So it will be. And I think upskilling is important, reskilling. I personally feel multi-skilling because, today the talent that we are looking for needs to understand the intersects as well. So I think it's going to be a combination for all. And trust me, it's not just in the tech space. It is across the spectrum of industry. So that's the one part that employees must think about. And one of the reasons why voluntary attrition is happening, because people are also moving out of companies where they are tasked with still very routine jobs and they are not being exposed to new skills. People realize it is better to take a salary cut and to go to a company which will allow them to work on more emergent areas, newer skill areas, because if they don't do that, come that moment when business cycles go south, you are likely to be more vulnerable. So it's a very easy equation to visualize. One more thing that I'd like to add, if I may, beyond the employees' need to upskill, etc. I think I will be honest. I see challenges in corporates' culture, leadership, communication. There is no doubt that trust is at a deficit in many, many organizations. When people grow, they are over promoted to levels that they are not able to visualize the role of leadership. We talk more about leaders and we talk do very little about leadership. I think it's a time when companies, and from my own advisory experience, I think this is what also needs a very serious and longitudinal focus, because business will definitely get better. I think you've heard all the panelists talk about the fact that we are bullish about the future, but I think it's a time both for employees to really refocus on their skilling agenda, but equally for organizations to very seriously and honestly look at, is their culture, is their leadership, and is their entire way of communicating and engaging with their employees passing muster? I am not very sure it is.
All right, Rituparna, if I were to take this back to you, tell us how do you read employment news like this, because that's what floods everybody's timelines these days. Now how is one supposed to look at all this? For example, somebody like me who is like everybody else is going through the performance appraisal season. How am I supposed to view the trends when I see the fact that everybody from Google to UBS to startups in India are letting go of people in tens of thousands?
So, I know we keep coming back to the same point, but my reflection or my assessment from ground level, talking to many of these organizations candidly, suggests that, finally, laying off people because of performance reasons essentially is not really what makes the news. I mean, every organization, especially those who are gold on profitability, productivity, business performance, essentially have very, very strict and detailed ways by which they measure performance of their employees and give constant feedback. However, yes, I actually lean more that some of what you're seeing is what's happening in the specific sector. I mean, there have been resurgence of some technology, there has been innovation, there has been excess hires, extremely optimistic hires that were made during the COVID period in terms of the outlook, so on and so forth. And everyone is accountable to shareholders. And I think some of them are essentially reactions to that. But leaving that aside for a minute, I think we are definitely living in a world where you should not treat anything as given. I mean, increasingly, we live in a world which is uncertain. Yesterday there was pandemic. Day before yesterday there was pandemic. Yesterday there is a war, and this is the world. And hence, it's very important that there is recalibrations in expectations and choices by both individuals as well as organizations. So organizations will have to transform, keeping that reality in mind, and so would individuals. From an organization's perspective, I think we would notice and we would observe that there would be layered types of employment that could be emerging.
Right, Rituparna, the reason why I was asking you was I want to understand, is there a learning from the employees side that like a reskilling and upskilling is the way forward is one thing, but that is one way. But from the employer's side, do you think the wrong kind of hiring keeps happening and wrong kind of mistakes in terms of assessing the kind of workforce and the nature of the workforce, and there's not much changing from the employer's end as well. That's also contributing to all these layoff numbers.
So absolutely, look, here we live in a world where organizations are constantly trying to balance the next quarter expectations with the next quarter century's expectations. So, and I think it's a very, very difficult choice for organizations these days. There are analysts and there are shareholders who are expecting certain kind of results, and then employees are expecting certain things from the organizations. And there is a vision and a purpose and a goal that the organizations have set out. And sometimes they are in contradiction or in conflict with each other. So it's difficult for each organization. But I think more and more organizations are realizing that they need to ensure that they have to reduce most of their fixed costs. So organizations, that's why, would look at leaner models, whether it's their workspaces, whether they're office spaces. Very few organizations will own enterprise buildings or assets. Whether it's in terms of employees, there will be permanent employees for certain core functions, but you will see temporary workforce, contingent workforce coming into picture, gig workers, freelancers, apprentices. I mean, you will see how soon organizations will evolve in terms of how they manage to get their work done. And in terms of employee, I think I've spoken. I think for an employee perspective, a skill today is not going to be relevant tomorrow, and hence we need to constantly change. But there are a few lessons in it, that this knee-jerk reaction based on in anticipation of a great time in future, or in terms of great revenue expansion, that those kind of hirings most organizations will clamp down on. Most organizations will wait for revenue, wait for the market to open up, or so on and so forth, before they look at ramping up. That in the past, we saw exactly the opposite. People would rush to ramp up in anticipation of future growth, and then something happens, and then you see these kind of layoffs. So you would increasingly see organizations resort to much more caution-based hiring and no more anticipatory hiring like it used to happen in the past.
Right. The anticipatory hiring could have contributed to these numbers. Pragati Sharma, that's one definite factor that is emerging at this stage. And do you see that reducing from the employers' end going forward? Smarter planning of workforces and better definition of job roles probably going forward?
Absolutely. I can take various examples of how hiring happens differently today. I think when the edtech boom was going on, we saw a lot of not just founders, but also HR departments saying, we need to fill this role as of yesterday. The job definition, the understanding of the role, why do we need this person, at what level, at what salary? There was no planning done on that front. We just wanted to fill a role at that time, right? So that's how the whole probably wrong hiring happened for a lot of edtech companies at that time, for which obviously we are paying now. At the same time, I think today, what I see across not just new startups is, yes, planning very, very well, like Rituparna said, on whether they need to hire at all. That's first question. Second is, if we are hiring, should we hire for this role at a senior level, at a mid-level, or a junior level? That conversation very rarely happened in startups for that matter. Thirdly, on budgets. Budgets have been slashed down by probably 20 to 25%, and for the right reason. Earlier on, we did not see any constraint on budgets across a lot of functions for startups. Today, even if the startup has funds, right, it is well funded for, let's say, 2 to 3 years, they are being extremely careful about the kind of skill sets, whether those skill sets are going to be relevant 2 3 years down the line, whether the cost is going to be bearable. Career growth is a conversation we're seeing for the first time, especially in Series B, C that's happening now. It's beautiful to see how even founders are going as deep as, okay, will the person be relevant for me after 2 to 3 years? And at the same time, can I give them a career in my organization where they will stay around? So, I think it's a good time. It's a time when everyone is doing things after giving it deep thought on the role, on the compensation, location, flexi, non-flexi, diversity. I think it's a good time. It's a good time to be there.
It's a good time. Okay, okay. Mr. Prabir Jha, if I were to take this back to you, if you were to approach the job market smartly, sensibly, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. That's the fact of the matter. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, it will not be the panacea for sure, because there are many things which still come to play. But at least it's a good starting point. A little bit more of sensitivity, sensibility, and sense, will help employers, overcome this issue. And for the employees and potential employees, very clearly, when you go in, you also know that, not every day is going to be a day when it will be showering, presents for you. You've got to be keeping your edge. And that's something that employees also have got a root shock for over the last 1 year and more.
Right. I'm asking this from the perspective of the companies and their plans from how much of macroeconomics and overall global headwinds and tailwinds wise as far as India and Indian companies are concerned. Now, would you say that largely there are no concerns on that front when it comes to the headcount that they're looking to hire?
I think overall, in macro terms, Indian companies will do well. And because we are still talking about what gets reported in the press, but there's a lot of action which is happening in tier 2, tier 3 towns, last mile delivery, etc., etc. So I hear some very positive stories, which normally we don't talk about sitting in our bigger cities. So I think overall things are good. There will always be exceptions. There will always be moments, and they will be by company and by industry seasonal. But overall, I think the growth and the opportunities for employees and employment will remain to be seeing in the upward slope.
Right. Just stay with us. I'm going to take this back to Pragati as well. Pragati, talk to us in terms of, tell us, how do you see the market panning out for the rest of this year, the calendar year per se? We are in the middle of appraisal season, which means that there will be movement of workforce post this.
Mm-hmm. I would still say positive. I think the trends are absolutely in our favor. We have a lot of laying off outside India. So let's understand that if US, my belief is that if in US 600 people were fired, 100 jobs are coming to India, right? Out of those 600. So we have a lot of bullish outlook as far as tech, as far as data, as far as analytics, as far as AI, ML, all the new fields in IT are concerned. And like Prabir said, Indian companies are doing great work. The kind of growth plans they have, they don't speak much about it. They are conservative by nature, so they do a lot of planning before they go out. And those companies, and of course, we're working actively with a lot of them that are launching, digitizing, transforming themselves to the new world. Also feel that while the startup winter is going on, I think there is funding available for companies that can show profitability, that can show growth, good numbers, and founders that are not overly hyped up about numbers. There's funding available, and we see it happening also, right? Funds are raised. Healthify Me raised it recently. So it's a lot of positivity. I think it's just a shift. And we should be absolutely positive about the changes that business is going through, and hiring definitely will remain 2023.
So hiring will remain for the rest of 2023 is the word coming from Pragati Sharma. Pragati, thank you so much for joining with us. Let me take this back to Rituparna as well. Again, same thing, same question to you, Rituparna. Tell us, in terms of trends, what are you seeing for the rest of the year? Halfway down as far as this calendar year is concerned. We have another 6 months left of this calendar year. We are going to be through with the appraisal seasons in a month or so. From that perspective, tell us, how do you view the next 2 quarters for this calendar year?
I think the tech side, you will see a little more sluggishness for a few more months, though there is some revival that is being seen, some green shoots, which is great. But let's not expect anything remarkable or a blockbuster coming in from the tech sector in the next few months. But for the rest of the other industries, it's like, I would say it's a Goldilocks outlook, neither hot nor cold, but it's going to be a very sustainably warm, which means that it's a normal situation. It's essentially, when newsprints and newspapers come out with this font 32 news saying this layoff, that layoff, it kind of tarnishes some of the good work that is otherwise happening, and in a steady approach in organizations which have made the right choices, right? So it's a tad unfair to just say that everything is bearish. So I would say that it's going to be a normal situation here on in terms of hiring.
And that is precious, isn't it, Rituparna? Because, getting normal, because, that famous Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. You don't want interesting, we want normal, isn't it? And that in itself is a great compliment to the times that we are in.
Yes, absolutely. We'll be normal times.
So anyways, Mr. Prabir Jha, we're looking at a normal rest of the year 2023. Just want to understand, for people who are trying to plan for the next appraisal season, from their perspective, would you say that they should be bullish when it comes to at least the next appraisal, if whatever be the case with this one?
Must be bullish, no doubt about it. At the individual level, they must make sure that they are answering their questions honestly, because there is no free lunch. That is for sure. And companies will remind you, if not in this appraisal season, in the next. So if you want to make sure you've got your breakfast, lunch, dinner for next fiscal lined up, then make sure you pull your socks up, you're imaginative, creative, and adequately skilled at whatever you do.
I'm asking this because one is the fact that you have employers having certain expectations from employees, but I'm also asking from the perspective of employees having certain expectations from their employers to see if they're doing justice for all the creativity and initiative and the talent and the persistence that the employees bring to the table, the reskilling and the upskilling, those who bring that to the table. Should they look at being more bullish? Rituparna, I've heard to bring that to you. Should they look at being bullish because the market is for them? The market is for them, and they should look to capitalize on that.
I think people should expect meritocracy. People should expect that if they perform and they deliver, they will get the rewards. What has happened, unfortunately, in the recent past, a lot of belief had set in that everything will come to me and then I shall come to work and perform. I'm not saying it applies to everyone, but I guess the world is moving towards meritocracy. So there will be no free lunch technically and literally, like Mr. Jha said. So there will not be these cafeterias offering these 5-course, 7-course meals anymore, or you get holidays in your anniversaries and you get sent to Europe for Swiss vacations.
Or expense accounts.
You would see those frills will disappear. You will perform and the organization shall reward you in accordance to that. And that should be the only thing one should bear it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mr. Jha, also I'm asking from the employees' perspective. It's also important, they're aware and they enter any kind of employment situation with their eyes wide open and sort of temper their expectations in the new normal that we find ourselves in, isn't it? That's also crucial.
Absolutely, and I think people are already more aware and sensitive. And I think people realize that it's not going to be a guaranteed situation. So I think the employees are going in with their eyes and ears open. I just want to, however, remind ourselves that employers need to still recognize that good talent will always have demand in a market, as some of my co-panelists have also highlighted, right? And it is very important for employers to be conscious that even if someone leaves the organization, do they go out as a good brand ambassador for the company, because the spring shall come, howsoever small or long the winter has been. And I think that's something that the companies typically play pendulum with. they swing to extreme reactions. But I think that maturity will help get a more balanced equation between employees and employers, which of late I have seen, actually go a little dithering in the last some years.
Oh, absolutely. That's a very important point, isn't it, Mr. Rituparna? The fact that relationship, if good careers are all about great relationships built and deepened over time, and this relationship between the employer, the employee, and the levels of trust is something that has been lacking, especially in the recent past.
Yeah, I think, yes, of course, there probably in some cases there has been kind of a question mark on the role of an employer and the role of the employee and how they kind of work together. I think an employer should remind themselves that an employee is not a submissive to the organization, right? And neither is the employer the dominant. I think it's clearly this message needs to be understood by every employer. And from an employee, I mean, employee also needs to understand that employer is not the everything and end all be all to make all his or her wishes come true. And I think somewhere making that realistic trade-off between what we expect from each other, finally it's a barter of competencies and skills. That's happening today. And it's not like it used to be before. And that mutual respect and complementing relationship is an understanding that you don't have to love and like each other. You just have to respect each other for the skills and the complementing skills that you're bringing to each other, and that you don't really owe anything beyond what the transaction is all about. And yes, you expect respect for the respect you give. I think as long as there is understanding of that sort, and there is transparency in communication. I heard Prabir talk about it a while back. I think we are on the side of under communicating. I think today we live in a world where communication is everywhere. There is Insta, there is television, there is print. I mean, we are always communicating. Leverage it.
Yeah,
And
but not the right, for the right reasons, for the right
employees
impact.
Yes, absolutely. Make them allies. I think what's happening is that the partitions that we create between I am the management, you are the employee, I think that's in any case breaking, and it needs to be questioned and challenged wherever it's still not broken. So, and when that happens, you will see the situation improving.
Wait, Prabir Jha, listening to all of this, listening to Rituparna reminds me, this feels like the entire pandemic and the situation post-pandemic was sort of like, the opening of the Pandora's box, so to speak, in that entire trust factor between the employer and the employee relationship, and now we're dealing with the consequences of that. When initially, the famous churning of the oceans that we talk about, initially the toxicity comes out, and then eventually the amrit comes out. And here's hoping, going forward, the amrit comes out as far as employment is concerned.
Krishna, you said it beautifully, and it is so true. And I personally think, it's all about realizing it's a partnership of trust, a partnership of respect, and a partnership of reciprocity. And that is why I raised this issue of communication. See, if times were to get bad, people like to be informed, people like to be educated. And I don't think it's only about individuals being told when, the horse has bolted. So I think it's interesting times, but I personally believe this is really what leadership evolution is all about. This is what managerial capability buildup is. Each manager who has gone through this experience or is living the experience as even we do our conversation today should possibly reflect and say, what can I do to be a better leader, to be a better manager? As the individual employee says, what can I do to ensure I'm not on the layoff list as and when one comes? And I think it is in that conversation, it is in that partnership that I think the fate not only of individual managers and employees are made, but in many ways, the fate of organizations get created.
Right. Rituparna, in the middle of this is an important vein of thought that I also want to touch upon, and that is the fact that when somebody is good at managing people who is not a manager, that skill is often seen by employers as a soft skill. Whereas, in reality, that is the hard skill that somebody should be rewarded for, irrespective of whichever vertical or whichever specialization that employee belongs to.
Whether you call it a soft skill or a hard skill, it's a critical skill. So it doesn't matter if it gets colored as a soft skill. our ability to manage people, our ability to influence people, our ability to inspire people, I think is a very important skill set, and every organization right now are realizing it. So some people have it, some people don't have it, but it's a very much an acquirable skill set. So it is something that employers should be focusing on in terms of, and when I say managing people, it's not about bossing over people. A lot of people think managing people is about bossing. It's not that. It's about, finally, it's about understanding that every person.
It's so funny you say that because the word managing people itself has a negative connotation. Already it has a negative connotation. Managing people means just like managing them to shush them up, managing to shush them up, and not necessarily listening to them and really taking people along. The reason why I'm asking you is this: I call it a soft skill because there is hard skills and soft skills. There was a larger buckets that an employee was viewed as under in terms of the skill sets they bring to the table. And now you introduce a new word called critical skills. So do you think that going forward, that's like for any job, irrespective of the specialization the job requires, certain critical skills will be looked at both in terms of hiring and in terms of promotions and increments?
I will just elaborate this a little more. I didn't think that was the scope of today's conversation, but in a few seconds.
Okay.
Why I said critical skills is that, we live in a world where everyone's talking about the possible effects of technology, automation, generative AI in terms of workforces, right? You will see that there will be a set of these so-called hard skills, which are templatable, which are standardized, which are easily learnable, will be taken over by technology. So what will differentiate and what will take organizations ahead are largely these non-cognitive skills, or the so-called soft skills, which essentially are today emerging as the skills which are not easy to automate, replicate, or codify. And hence, they are emerging as critical skills. So just to emphasize, and why I call them critical skills, because these are skills not everyone possesses. You can get technical skills, but you may not get these skill sets. It's not something you can manufacture in a factory so easily.
Oh, definitely not. And that's certainly been the big reckoning as far as the entire churn and amongst layoffs is concerned. I'm afraid we've completely run out of time away. Thank you for all the panelists joining us on this broadcast and sharing your thoughts and perspective. With that, we wrap up this particular edition of Business Plus. Thank you so much for watching. This is Krishnakumar signing off. Keep it with News 9.